Good morning. Today is the 16th day of Shvat and the 7th day of February, and we are continuing with our daily Chasidut learning from a mimer from the Rebbe Rashav, the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, from Tafresh Mem Zayin 5647, which translates into 1887. And we're looking at the reason why Jethro's name changed from Yeter to Yitro. They added a Vav to his name when he converted. And how this is related to the question of why is it needed that Yitro should convert before the Torah can be given. Okay, let's skip to everything we saw so far in the first chapter is things that we've seen many times. Skip to chapter 2. Meaning, the way that the animal soul is transformed is through meditation. What does this mean? It means, normally when we think about tshuva, one of the big discoveries that the Zohar gives us is that there are two forms of tshuva. Right? The Zohar says there is tshuva tata and tshuva ilah. Tshuva tata means lower tshuva. Lower tshuva is what people understood for many, many generations. It meant that a person who didn't keep a mitzvah, he does tshuva. So if he transgressed or if he didn't keep it, whichever it was, he did tshuva by changing his actions. It was all about actions. Then says the Zohar, but there's also tshuva ilah, tashuv hey ilah. How does it know this? Because it understands the word tshuva as tashuv hey, the hey shall return. Except that in God's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, we have two heys. There's the higher hey, which corresponds to bina, to understanding, contemplation, and there's the lower hey, which corresponds to action, to malchus, to kingdom. So the lower hey, when it returns to its rightful place, it means that the person changes his actions. That's the tshuva that everybody recognized before the Zohar. But the Zohar's understanding that there's a higher tshuva also means that there's a tshuva that's not based on action, on the lower hay, but rather on contemplation, on the higher hay. And that mitzvah, to contemplate, is a form of tshuva which is higher, which is different in a sense than the tshuva that comes below. In other words, when does the lower tshuva work? When the only problem that a person has is that he's connected to God, except there's different things that he doesn't keep for whatever reason. So he needs to change his ways. That's the lower tshuva. The higher tshuva is when the person realizes I'm not even connected. I don't even have a real connection. How do I know that I don't have a real connection? So in the Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe explains that if you, for a moment, think about the fact that you are here with God in front of you, and that thought is not enough to awaken in you yearning for God, then you have to do higher tshuva. Then it's not enough for you to do lower tshuva. You have to do the higher tshuva. You have to contemplate. What that means is that the animal soul in you has the better of you. And you have to change that. How do you change that? By contemplating that God, Havaya, is God. And what does that mean? When you contemplate the Shema, which you should be thinking is like this, that our God means the one who creates or brings into being the light that fills the worlds and the light that surrounds the worlds, meaning the light that is integrated into reality, the revelation of God that is integrated, and the revelation of God that is not integrated. Only the one that's integrated. V'sovev kol almin, and the light that surrounds, meaning the light that encompasses the world, the revelation of God that is not integrated, hu mibchinat havaya, which means haya uvevi yeh echad. That comes from the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, the tetragrammaton, God's essential nature, His substance. From His substance comes the very existence of reality. What he says here, He was, He is, He will be. Like one, there everything is one, and it's the infinite light, meaning the infinite revelation of God, that brings being into existence from nothingness. V'hu havaya echad she'en bo shum shinui. And then there, and in the havaya, as we've talked about many times, in sovev, in the surrounding light, there is no change ever. It's always the same. And we said that the way that you can picture this is that you look at the world not as a fluid, dynamic reality, but you try to spread it out as if you were looking at many, many pictures that were then put together in a motion device that causes it to look like it's moving. But really, when it comes to Sovev Kolamin, the light that encompasses everything, there it's like everything is spread out all at once. Hayaho veviya. The past, the present, and the future are all in front of it at the same time. So there's no change, because really the change, another example that we gave was you're looking at a big portrait, one of these huge scenes of a battle that you can find in some museums. And so there's a million things happening there on that portrait, on that huge picture, that huge painting. But none of them are moving, none of them are changing. But if you move your eyes, you can create what seems to be like motion, like change. So really the change is from our perspective. But from his perspective, everything is already laid out. Again, he's just giving different sources for this notion that the higher aspect of God, the transcendent aspect of God, is one that does not change. So you have to contemplate that. And you have to understand that what you have in you, which is changing, derives from that. Meaning that the light that fills all worlds, the light that integrates, the revelation of God that integrates into the person, it stems from that revelation that cannot integrate. You can't say that existence came out of God in the sense of like a evolution, like one thing leading to another. Why? Because there's a gap between the reality of this of godliness, let's call it the substance of God, and existence as we see it. It's not like what we were talking about before, that the character traits of a person derive from his mental state, derive from his intellect. It's not like that, because there you see a connection. There's one thing leads to the other. There's a cause and effect. How do we know this? You see that when the intellect is small, when a child is a young child, then what he wants emotionally, his character, is a small character. He wants small things. There's a word missing here. And the more a person matures and becomes older, so then his emotions increase and he's not satisfied with what he wanted when he was young. So there you see that there's a direct connection between how the intellect is, how the mental state is, and how the character will develop. And right away you see that it's not just that one is derived from the other, but rather the ilah, the reason, is included within the result. The cause is within the effect. Because of this, because the reason is within the effect, in this case the intellect is within the emotions, the intellect is within the character, a person cannot act out two different mental states at the same time. Right? We see this in dissociative identity disorder. Right? They used to be called multiple personalities. Now it's called dissociative identity disorder. What does it mean? That every mental state has a different character. And he can't be two of them at the same time. He has to move between the two. Basically what dissociative identity disorder is a extreme example of what it means that the character, my character, who I play, who I am, my identity, cannot hold more than one mental state at the same time. It's just that by me, I switch between them without losing my coherence of who I am. So right now I'm sitting and learning with you, so I play the part of the one who's explaining. But when I'm davening, I'm playing the part of something entirely different, because I'm in two different mental states. Here I'm in the mental state of I need to explain what this says. I need to understand and explain it. When I daven, I don't have to explain it. I'm not in the mental state of explaining. I'm in the mental state of beseeching, of asking. But by me, I just switch between them. I'm still Moshe. I'm still the same guy. Why? Because my mind is able to handle the switch between different mental states without having to think that I'm someone different. But by a person who has dissociative identity disorder, they can't do that. So every time they switch from one mental state to another, they have to switch personalities entirely. And the personality can be someone entirely different. By the way, that's one of the prime examples, one of the best examples, that the whole notion, sorry of saying this now, of a person having an attraction to the other sex or to the same sex is entirely a mental state. It's entirely a mental state. It's a character that they play. Except that most people have attraction to the same sex. But a person who doesn't have the attraction to the same sex, for whatever reason, he has it also, but it's filed away somewhere, he can't get to it. But the person who has an attraction to the same sex, he plays a different personality. It's all personality. It's a mental state that causes a personality. It's not something ingrained in us. It's not biological. In attraction is not just biological. In any case, and it's because the cause here, the mental state, encloses itself in the effect, in the character. And therefore, the character comes out according to the cause. In any case, what he's saying is that that's the regular way in which things relate one to another. But with God creating the world, it's not that way. I was going to skip the parentheses. V'nikra hitavut yesh miyesh, and this is called something from something. Hitavut is coming into being. So it comes into being something from something. רוצה לומר, מה שנתהוו מידות שבלב מהשכל הוא התהוות יש מיש. So what causes the character traits to come out from the intellect is called a coming into being something from something. יש מיש. דבאמת אין כל חדש במה שנתגלה להיות מידות שבלב, וגם קודם התגלותם היו כלולים במוח שהם מבחינת מידות שבשכל. Because in truth, the character traits already existed in the mind before they were acted out in the heart. That's called the character within the intellect, or the emotions within the intellect. They already existed within the intellect. They just became expressed through the heart. And therefore, if a person feels love or hate, he has an affinity to something, or he despises something, he can't come near it. All these things are not new. They're not a new reality. What are they? It's simply the excitation in the heart of what was already in the intellect. And that's very important to understand, that we're not creating anything new. So when a person has thoughts that lead him to hate, so first he has the thoughts, then he feels the hate. That's the way it's supposed to be. It's not always that way. Why is it not always that way? Right, because sometimes, well, it's not an instant dislike, it takes time. I was going to say that if you already dislike someone, it doesn't have to go through the brain. Because you already have awakened that in your heart. So when you've already awakened it in your heart, the heart remembers, it already has that emotion within it. But in general, like we say to children, try this, you might like it. Right? They don't want to eat it. Why? Because they look at it, they don't like it. But you haven't tasted it. You don't know what it's really like. You're just imagining. So what are they imagining? They haven't tasted it. They're imagining with their head, with their intellect. Their imagination is telling their intellect, oh, this is not good, so I don't want it. But then we tell them, try it. And then the intellect says, oh, wait a minute, this actually tastes good. And so you have to get over your aversion to what you thought you despised. So what the heart is in this case is it's expressing the emotions that already existed in the intellect. Even though it's called a begetting, as if you're giving birth. In different places it's called the tolada, it's called the beginning. Still, the emotions that come from the intellect are not a new creation. They're not like a child that's born from a mother. It's rather the mother who's already pregnant and the child just coming out. It's not the conception. It's not making something new. Okay. ולכן אנו רואים, go ahead. ולכן אנו רואים בכל עילה ועלול שיש לו הפסק וגבול כמו המידות, יש להם גבול עד כמה יגיע המידה. כמו מידת אהבה, יש לה גבול, לזה אהבה באופן כזה ולזה באופן אחר. What we see, one of the corollaries of this is that the emotions always have a limit. Meaning that there's only so much that you'll love someone, or there's only so much that you won't, that you'll have an aversion to them. There's always a limit to it. Because the intellect also has a limit. So that's one of the corollaries. What this means also is that because the intellect is limited, there are only so many feelings you can have. And there's only so much that you can influence your heart, because your intellect is limited to begin with. So therefore, what the heart expresses is also limited. ומה שאנו רואים לפעמים שהמידות אהבה ויראה יכולים להיות בלי גבול. כמו אהבה שלמעלה מגדר הכלי וכן היראה ופחד מאיזה דבר גדול, אין זה מצד עצם השכל והטעם של אהבה ויראה, כי אם מפני שורש המידות עצמן כמו שהם בעצם נפש, כמו שמבואר במקום אחר. But now he's saying that obviously sometimes we do see that there is hate or love without end, fear without end. He says that is not emotions that come from the intellect, because the emotions also have their own source which is higher than the intellect. So sometimes the emotions can come from that higher source, and because that higher source is above the intellect, it is not limited in any way. It can be, infinite. But again, that's the exception. That's not the way that we usually develop our character. אבל מידות הנולדים מהשכל, but those emotions, those character traits that come out of the intellect, יש להם גבול למידה, they always have a limit. ומכל זה מובן שבחינת יש מיש ועלול הוא בערך העילה. וממילא מובן שעלול פועל שינוי בעילה. One next thing that comes out of this is that the effect changes the cause, meaning the intellect continually changes the heart. Okay, so much, this is all about, not just the intellect changes the heart, but that the heart, because the intellect is within it, is also changing the intellect all the time. But when we talk about the coming into being of the worlds from the infinite light of God, meaning from God's infinite revelation, here the process is not one of something from something, but rather something from nothing. Meaning that you can't trace. When we say something from nothing, we don't really mean that the source is nothingness. What we mean to say is that the source is incomprehensible. We can't understand it. We can't recognize it. That's the issue. We don't really mean that the source is nothing. When we say about Hashem that He's the source of the world, we don't mean to say that God is nothing at all. We don't mean to say He's nothingness. It's nothing like the Eastern philosophies. What we're saying is that we cannot comprehend, we cannot fathom what the source is. When we talk about physicality, corporeality coming out of something spiritual, there is no greater gap from nothingness to somethingness, meaning from something that we don't comprehend to something that we do comprehend. We don't comprehend what the spiritual is. We don't understand what it is. And then suddenly it begets the physical. Here he doesn't mean spirituality in the usual sense of spirituality. He means here spirituality in the sense of that which is not corporeal, that which is not physical, which is not material. שאין הגשמי בערך הרוחני כלל, והוא דבר חדש לגמרי, דמציאות הגשמי לא היה מעולם ברוחני, ונתהווה מציאות חדש לגמרי. So we see that the physical matter can never be explained as coming out of something spiritual. And here again, spiritual is not a thought of a triangle. It's not that thought. The spiritual here, he means that which is beyond the material, that which is God, which is beyond. וכמו צמיחת התבואה או הפרי מהכוח הצומח שבארץ שהוא דבר חדש שלא היה מעולם בעצם כוח הצומח. So the same thing is when we talk, in their times, the example for this was that things grow out of the ground. So they couldn't understand, because I'm putting in a small amount of matter called a seed, and I'm watering it. How does that suddenly sprout into a huge tree? What happened here? So as far as they were concerned, that was the example of something coming out of nothing, because you couldn't fathom how was it that the ground had this incredible power to grow this tree. That was the example in their times. Today, science has changed. Today, science doesn't hold by that anymore. What does it say? It says, I can show you the conservation of energy and matter in this whole story. There's nothing new here. So what would we say today? Today, the power of growth that was in the ground, today we attribute it not to the ground, we attribute it to the seed. That's the way science has changed. But you have to understand their point of view in order to understand the point he's getting at. From the point of view that the ground is making the produce grow, then the ground is introducing something, it's changing its power of growth into something material. And he says that's a skip, because you can't see in the ground where all this matter is coming from. Okay, we'll stop here. Now, again, this is a very big topic, that in Chasidus we don't change the scientific example that was brought, even though science has changed. But you have to be aware of it, that today nobody understands that the ground has some kind of power of growth. We don't see it that way. We see it as the seed itself. Where we would see something like that more closely, or more exactly, would be like in the growth of a fetus. That there, it is the womb that's making it grow. It's not the fetus by itself. The womb is causing something. Now, slowly, maybe it could be that as time goes by, we will recognize more and more that there is something in the ground that causes all of this to happen. There might be some hormones. What? I understand, because that was the scientific understanding at the time. So he uses, this was the scientific understanding for millennia. Today it's different. In any case, we'll continue tomorrow.